be here. I was supposed to be here in October to talk, and we'd actually talked about this before COVID. And obviously things changed substantially over a pretty short period of time. So it's really nice to be here. We can all be in public, we're not wearing masks, and it will be good. So the term heliotropic, what does that mean? And for me, what that's always been is the definition is when you have a plant, a house plant, whatever that is, and they put their face to the sun. You know, you're always turning your plants because they're, you know, leaning this way and doing whatever. But I always thought of myself as like this big sunflower with too much hair, a million seeds, which is all the thoughts, this big heavy head on this skinny little stalk, and how that sunflower is always kind of chasing the sun. And that seems to be my life, and it seems to be what I'm always doing, is having this wild amount of stuff going on, but always pivoting to wherever the sun seems to be at that moment. So that's a bit of where the original thing was. You might have seen on Facebook, I said my original thing was how to be a hot mess and still find success. I still think, especially after the last week, that might have been my best go-to. But anyways, it's you're laughing, but it's very true. So I thought I'd give a little bit of information about just me as a person. I think it's always fun to learn a little more about people than what you see. So, you know, I think we've all been reading books and doing all these things, and there's all these wonderful self-help things and all the stuff that you want to do. So one that I was trying to do was that 5 a.m. club. Has anybody tried to read that book? Didn't work. I more of the hit snooze 3 times and have 30 minutes of negative self-talk. That seems to be my morning routine. I have definitely called in sick for work before because I've had a bad dream I couldn't get out of. This is true. This is how my brain works. My guilty pleasure, and coming from my childhood, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but when we had money and we knew times were good, we had Cheese Whiz. And if we had Cheese Whiz, we knew like everything was gonna be okay. So I love Cheese Whiz, and my best and worst days, you'll find me in my Volkswagen Beetle in the McDonald's drive-thru getting a single Happy Meal cheeseburger. And then those are the little things that, I think that, you know, Cheese Whiz and McDonald's cheeseburger is a sign of affluence in my world. That's how, when we had money and times were good, that's what we did. So those are just a few of the many idiosyncrasies of me. So for tonight it was a little bit hard because I wanted to talk about me and who I am, but I also really wanted to talk about the Evergreens Foundation and the work that we're doing. And the more time that I spent thinking about what I was gonna say, I realized that they were kind of the same thing. And so that was an interesting realization for me. I also said I was gonna wing it, and at 2 o'clock today I wrote 4 pages of notes. So if this is the worst speech I ever did, it's probably because I usually wing it, and maybe I over-prepared. But I wanted to start to talk about me at age 5. So I never really had strong career goals. Much to my mother's chagrin, that, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? Astronaut, you know, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a, you know, lawyer. I wanted to be a waitress and a wife. And I was a damn good waitress. I won't say anything more about that. I was raised very religious. I think many of you know my parents, Dave and Denise Chambers. We moved to Hinton in the early 90s from Beaver Lodge. And my parents managed apartments. And so we were apartment managers. So you knew how to clean, you knew how to do move outs, you knew how to do eviction notices, you learned all of that stuff right from the beginning. And many of the personal and business relationships I have today really go back to that time in the apartments. You know, even some of the staff we have, maybe the first few months that they lived in Hinton, they were living in the apartments while they were waiting to take possession of their house. You know, different things, or relationships I have with contractors still to today. It was an incredible learning curve for me, and it might have been a little bit of child labor, but it was good. It taught me a lot. My first job was a real job, you know, back, not the child labor one, was at the White Spot, when the White Spot opened. And that was a really interesting experience because if you have the opportunity to be onboarded by a franchise, it is a really cool experience and something that I think changes you forever. You end up with this kind of indoctrination into a work culture and strategy that you'll never find if you go back there and work. You know, you can go work at the place a year later, but you're not getting that full team kind of just diving in and giving you all of that information. So I was homeschooling at that time. So I was getting up in the morning, doing my homeschooling, and then I would work the 11 to 8 shift. Then I was later recruited by Boston Pizza, and I went to their manager school. And I spent quite a few years working with the Griffiths family at Overlander and Jacob Duncan, who I think everybody knows and adores. They taught me a ton about the fine dining industry, working really hard and having some incredible times. So I've kind of always worked 2 jobs the majority of my life. Now I definitely don't have time for a second job, but you know, prior to this, that was what I was doing. I had my first son, Drake, in 2005 at age 21, and then in 2006 I started Kaler Contracting, which was a landscaping contracting business, which is still in business today, while also working at the Scotiabank in the mid-office and raising my young son. So one day I had Glenn Taylor, who I think all of you know. He comes up to me and he says, you know, Kristen, he says, I'm on the board of the Evergreens Foundation. He was mayor at the time. And he said, we've been trying to recruit for an asset manager position, and we're not really having success, and I think you'd be perfect for the job. And I said, no. I said, I have a small child, I have a business, plus another job. I said, I'm not interested in any more work. And he said, no, Kristen, he said, we need somebody who has kind of that office skill, business management side, but understands how maintenance, preventative maintenance, all these other things work. He says, you'd be perfect for it. He says, I'm gonna take myself away from this. He says, but I want you to really seriously consider applying for this job. And I said, I am not interested in being trapped behind a desk, and you can't pay me enough to be trapped behind a desk. So as luck had it, there was a lady that was looking for administrative work. So we ended up going into it as a job share. So I didn't have to be trapped behind the desk, that was her job. And I got to travel around to all the sites, and I got to do the hands-on work. So I worked with the maintenance man, and I did all that. So there I show up, this like little young blonde girl, and the maintenance men are like, who the hell is she? And what did she go to school for that she gets to tell me what to do? And they all ended up loving me eventually. It took a while though. Some of them, it took a while. So that was kind of the big thing. And if you ask any of my staff now, actually Madonna, I'm sure many of you know Madonna, she presented me with the award for the Loch Ness Monster Award. There's a lot of evidence that I've been around, but nobody really knows where I am. And it's kind of just become a bit of what we did. But the Evergreens Foundation to me was really love at first sight. I just dove in, and it was really, everything about the foundation picked up on little pieces of who I've always been and what my experiences were. The religious side of my family, that love of neighbor, that compassionate, non-judgmental thought process, and then that apartment manager side where I can help solder a copper pipe, hop into an attic, bleed the boiler lines of air and know all that stuff. I even had my own coveralls at Whispering Pines for a little while because I spent so much time in the attic. It was really interesting, and I remember one of my first meetings, and I think Bernie swears he wasn't at this meeting, but I'm pretty sure he was. It was a town meeting when the CAO of the Evergreens was telling all of the CAOs, all the town managers of the municipalities we represented, that the Jasper Seniors Lodge project was not $3.5 million, it was now $7 million. But he didn't tell me that at the time. So I went in there, I think I had a French braid and like a cute little sweater, and it was my first town meeting, and I had no experience with municipal politics. I mean, they could have been the town manager, the mayor, for all I knew at that point. And I remember Jack Ramey from Yellowhead County. I did my little presentation. I think I had a couple little slides and some poster boards and everything else. And he said, you need to, me, who had been there for about 4 days, and he said, you need to communicate better with the municipalities. We need to have more information. We need to have all of this. And I was so taken aback that I had been put in that position to take it, but I totally took it, and I thought never again would be in a meeting when somebody has the opportunity to talk to me like that. I thought, this is the last time. They're gonna get so much information they don't want me anymore. And so, anyway, so that was kind of one of my first big meetings where I realized, like, we're doing big work and we're doing good work. And while everybody in that meeting supported 100% what we were doing, it was that communication piece and that, don't be afraid to have that conversation and keep it going. Don't go from 3.5 and not talk to anybody and end up at 7. have those conversations in the middle and, you know, give everyone the opportunity to weigh in on that. So that changed a lot of how I did business. I thought, well, I'm diving in. So that asset and project management that I was doing in the beginning really turned into a lot of capital projects. So we did get our funding, despite that wild meeting. We built the Seniors Lodge in Jasper, which was my first full project that we completed in 2008. Barely completed it just before I had my second son, Brant. That's how we ended up with the lovely Madonna Popwell. She was my maternity leave coverage, and we didn't let her leave. So that's been really good. Moved on to the Parkland Lodge in Edson. There was a lot of stuff. So I love my career. I was doing really good. I always joked I worked part-time all the time. Everything was good. And then my CAO decides to retire at 55 and move to Turkey. And I was like, no, this is not, I like where I'm at. This is where I want to be. You should really apply for this job. And I thought, no, I don't want to be trapped behind the desk. I have the job I want. I love what I'm doing. Now I'm really gonna be trapped. And spoke to a few friends and colleagues, and one wise architect, who's the architect actually that designed the Parkland Lodge in Edson, said to me, Kristen, he says, stop looking at the tip of your nose and start looking at the tip of your finger. I said, you know, I'm a single mom, I've got 3 kids, Griffin's not in school yet, I don't know what to do. And I said, I don't know if I can do this. And he says, Kristen, this is short term. He says, you need to at least try. Worst case scenario, he says, you've still got a job that you love. And I thought, okay, that's true. So I thought, well, the hell with it, that's how I'm gonna go into my job interview. So I went in there with this raw, honest, I don't know, maybe it was a bad attitude, and I said, I know I'm perfect for this job, but I'm just scared of this and this and this and this. And then I was thinking this CAO interview would be this like list of hard questions, and I'm like, you're using the same questions we use for all our interviews at all of Evergreen. So it kind of took the edge off a little bit. But anyways, we just had a really raw conversation about, like, I know I can get there, but, you know, how do I stay there? And it was a really kind of liberating interview because, you know, we all fake it till we make it. That's what I'm even currently doing right now. But there's that piece where you just kind of have to own it. And so that was that. So they hired me. And May 1st in 2017, I became the CAO. But I was ill prepared for the trajectory of how much that would change my mindset. You know, my job prior was like keeping the ship afloat, making sure the boiler's going, making sure that there's no holes in the hull, and, you know, all those things. And all of a sudden it was like, I gotta set the course, I gotta, you know, find my crew, I've gotta grow the fleet, I gotta manage the bounty. Like, I have to do all these things that put all this extra pressure on. And although it was the same business that I knew and that I loved, the dynamic had shifted dramatically. And I was freaking terrified. I was absolutely terrified. And I remember sitting there the one day and I thought, how can I get what's in my head and, you know, and in my heart into the hands of the people that are at my sites? You know, the people that maybe I've never met, those casual employees, like, how can I do that? And it just was so overwhelming. And we have recently, if you get a chance to take a look at our website, we've done some incredible work on our new website. The old website was just disgusting. I swear there was a monkey in the back that was pedaling a bike to just try to keep it running. It was so bad. So we've redone that whole website, but it took really 5 years to come up with, like, what is this? What is that vision? What is that mission? And not just seniors housing, which we're well known for, but what about all the other types of housing that we have? And, you know, what's my vision for that? So that was a lot of work. And I think another thing that was big too is, you know, I had to try to encourage sort of that solution-based leadership. So although I'm full of outstanding opinions and I have no difficulty giving them, it really wasn't about me. And so when staff would bring problems, I'd say, don't even come into my office unless you're bringing a solution. And, you know, trying to empower people to really have that buy-in from themselves to say, okay, I gotta go talk to Kristen, but I'm not just gonna go in there and complain. I'm gonna go in there with, you know, I feel like I should call this person and do this. I feel like I should do whatever. And that made a huge difference as well. And over the last 5 years in the CAO position, I think we kind of hit those walls again and again. It feels a little defeating, I think, sometimes, because you're like, God, we were here, we did this in 2017, we did this in 2018. But, you know, Evergreen's foundation, since I became CAO, has had over 87% growth rate in staff. and a 59% growth rate in suites or number of units. And with the 2 projects that we have that we're in design undertaking right now, that number will increase to 77%. So that's insane. So that's why we keep hitting the same walls. And to be totally honest, before Christmas of this year, we had a really hard time at our head office currently. You know, we were so big, we did this great, amazing technological, well, don't talk to my staff about how amazing it is, but we did this amazing IT program, we added in, we've done all of this stuff, and it's hard. You know, it's hard, you're adding team members, you're changing that dynamic, and we have to grow and we have to change, but you know, there's always that point that still just takes us back to that basic, and you have to go back and do a ton of reflection. And then, you know, once your team's set up and you've got your people, then it becomes about, you know, what are we doing, who are we doing it for, why are we doing it, you know, and it's just the job of housing, I think, and I think any of my staff would agree with this, it sort of gets in your DNA. And, you know, I think that everything I eat, sleep, and breathe Evergreens Foundation, people say, oh, you need to take a vacation, you gotta check out, and I don't know that you check out from a job in housing. And I don't know that you need to. And you know, the amazing things that we're able to do, it just becomes part of who you are. And it's an extension of your being, and it's been pretty amazing. So the Evergreens Foundation is made up of 6 municipalities, for those of you that don't know. I won't spend too much time on it, but we have Yellowhead County, we have a bit of Parkland County, so kind of from Entwistle to the Seba Beach turnoff, that's our Parkland County section. We have MD Greenview, so that goes kind of from the Grand Cache area all the way up to Musreau Lake on the way to Grand Prairie. Excuse me, and then we have the town of Edson, the town of Hinton, and the municipality of Jasper. So we're managed by a board, so I'm the only employee of the board, and we have 6 board members, 1 from each of that group. And we provide many different programs. So we have a rent subsidy program, and so that is to support people who are housed to remain housed. And so that can be somebody settling into a home after fleeing domestic violence, somebody staying in their current home after they've had a substantial income change or a change in family composition. We have senior self-contained apartments, so that can be a senior that's downsizing. Maybe they've lost a mate, spouse, or maybe they're no longer able to work. That's where that comes in. And then we have the lodge program, which I think is really picking up a lot of steam because people are really seeing that as a way to keep and enhance their independence. It's not the nursing homes of the old days. The times have changed. We're doing pickleball. We got Riley now, geez. We've got a wellness coordinator. Like, nobody's sitting still anymore at these places. So it's, you know, it's pretty amazing. And as we look through everything, I think a lot of the old stigma around Evergreens Foundation was we're just seniors housing. Well, they're seniors housing, they do seniors housing. But, you know, kind of in line with me and my passion, I started to look at the seniors housing and say, you know, what are we doing with these facilities? You know, Jasper was a beautiful facility that we built, but, you know, are we trying to just do these cookie cutter, minimum standard, multi-purpose room, dining room, you know, little areas? Or, you know, what do we really want to do? So I had a board retreat and I hired a group of people, and I really wanted to just have the most controversial meeting I could have. And I wanted to lean into the difficult conversation. So I said, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about, we need this many beds in Edson, this many beds in Hinton, this many beds wherever. And I want you to say, we can get this many beds for this dollar, but we're gonna shrink the size of the activity spaces. You're only gonna have 1 janitor room. You know, we just downsized it all. And so I had one guy who was totally playing the part of like minimizing taxpayer dollars, blah, 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 running that line. I had another guy that was like, what about quality of life? And what about this? And what about that? And then I was in the middle, just being the instigator. And it was the best meeting I've ever had. And it was heated, and it was fascinating. But it got all the cards on the table really quick from the municipal representative to say, like, what are we building? And what is our goal? Is our goal, you know, just pumping out rooms that people have just a mediocre life in? Or is this a quality of living? And is this quality of living
just because it's subsidized housing, does that mean it should be less than other things? And it was a really interesting conversation. So, you know, the government had their minimum standards of all these things, you know, so many dollars per square foot is what you should average, and they don't do a different average for the rurals, they just base it all on urban prices, and, you know, and then we're just left scrambling to try to pick that up. But, you know, what it came down to is, why can't we have both? And why can't we make our decisions based on our individual communities and their individual needs? And everybody was on side by supper time. So that was pretty interesting. And then it kind of morphed into this, you know, engagement piece where we started going into communities and saying, you know, what do these communities want? And you'll hear me say it a million times if you've been around me, like, what does 24 hours in the life of a senior look like in a specific community? And not in Evergreens, but what does it look like in Edson versus Grand Cache versus Hinton versus Jasper? I can tell you they are very different. And then how can we replicate that in our facilities? Because everybody wants a purpose-filled life, and that kind of became that big realization of, like, you know, how do we do this? And the biggest thing that came out of all these kind of engagement sessions was, although we're moderate to low income seniors housing, we're in communities that don't have the capacity to have a high-end, you know, Christensen group, you know, whatever the group is that comes in and does this high-end living. We're the only game in town. So we started to spend a little bit of time on this mixed market, and the government hated me. And they said, you can't do that. You can't do that. This is seniors, this is subsidized housing. We do this, we do that. If you start putting balconies on places and people know that Evergreens Foundation put a balcony on a place and there was government money there, we're never gonna hear the end of it. And we just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And I said, you know what, I totally get that, but I'd like you to show me in the legislation where it says that my Evergreens Foundation board cannot, through their own municipally requisitioned funds, make the decision to make this building better for their community. And that was kind of a huge connection for me, because I was, you know, I was young and new, and I was naive enough to have the fight, because I think later on, you get a little jaded. But it is two different levels of government and some very different conversations, and they just couldn't come back at anything with me that was substantial. So we said, you know what, we're just gonna do it. We'll be very public about it. This is why we're doing it. This is what we're doing. We'll get the buy-in of our municipalities. So we went through and said, hey, we wanna do better than what the Alberta government says that we should be doing in our housing. And we are going to do that with municipally requisitioned taxpayer dollars. And do we or do we not have the support of the council and the municipalities? And if we do have your support, we need a letter of support so that we can send that up the line to the governments to say, look, all of our municipalities are on board with this, and they understand that this means that we have an opportunity to have housing for all Hintonites and all Edsonites and all, because there's nothing else available. And so it took me a good, a year. Vivian's laughing in the back. It was tough. It was really hard conversations. But I am quite proud to say that, 6 years later, I sat on the Affordable Housing Review Committee through COVID with Minister Pon, and I was awarded the Minister of Senior Service Award, the individual award, for pioneering the mixed market housing model in Alberta. And now it was kind of funny, because when this government came in and Minister Pon phoned me and she said, Kristen, she says, I hear you guys are doing a mixed market thing, and I just died laughing. I thought, really? Could I have your information on that? Could we see how you calculate rents? Could we see how you do your wait list? And I'm like, really? We did all this. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. And but that's really what we need to do, right? Is responding to that community need and really who we are and what that piece is. So now this is kind of my COVID-19 story. We all have to have a COVID-19 story in everything we do now, because that was our whole life for so long. So we have all these policies. Madonna looks after all these policies, and I'm like, these policies are ridiculous. I can't believe we have to have a pandemic policy. all of the community loses power for several hours a day policy, like we just had to have in Jasper, or the wildfire policy, all these things you think you never need, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, Madonna, where's that policy? and I was terrified. I think COVID terrified us all, but not more than I was terrified by having to homeschool 3 boys in French immersion. I don't speak French. But it was tough because it was kind of back to that day one as a CAO again, where I'm like, oh my God, this is all gonna fall on me. And how am I supposed to catch this? And how am I supposed to, like, I know I feel horrible, but my job is to make everybody else, all my other 200 staff, feel like I got them and they got this, and how am I gonna get there? And I was like, I need a seat at the big table. I need to be with the government, and I need to get there fast, and I need to be in there, and I was like a bloodhound. I was like, I need to figure this out. And so, with a lot of, let's call it advocacy, not nagging, I ended up on 2 expert panel committees within the government through the COVID. And it was pretty interesting to see, we'd get information would be released, we'd roll it out to our staff, we'd do all this stuff. And, we'd have workers from Alberta Health Services or home care or even hospitals, there's different things, and they'd say, that's not the direction. And our staff would be days ahead of, the larger groups that have that bigger silo to trickle through, right? And I thought all I can do is be educated and roll that out as quickly as possible. So there was a ton of meetings, and to be brutally honest, there was a couple meetings where I was working such long days, and we'd get information every Friday at 4:30 that we just have to change right when everybody was ready to go home. And I remember doing some Zoom meetings, just so burnt out with a migraine, with my laptop in my bed, with a blanket over top of me, because I thought, I can't miss this meeting, I know something's gotta happen, but just barely functioning, but knowing we had to roll that out, it was tough. It was really tough, and it was hard on our staff, it was hard on the residents, it was hard on the families, and every time we felt like we had it figured out, and we'd take that big deep breath, that friggin' change, and it was awful. And so we were all scared, but we were all informed, and there was very little that any of us had control over, but we did have control over getting that information out there in a timely way and being strong communicators and giving each other the time to, again, that vulnerable place of saying, I don't know what the hell is going on, but this is what they've told me today. So we're gonna follow it, this is how we're gonna follow it, I don't know if I support it, this is not my opinion, this is what we gotta do, and this is how I'm gonna help you do it. And that became a pretty big thing. I remember our first COVID outbreak was pre-vaccine, and that was bad. It was in Jasper, and it was terrifying. We did have several deaths. And I remember being in the truck, I was driving back with my kids, and from the lake one weekend, and hearing of like multiple deaths within the facility, and I remember just putting my head between my legs and just sobbing, and I thought, like, I can't believe I'm in this position, and what could I do, and what could I have done, and how do I support my staff, how do I support this community, how do I support the families, and every single day having to write a letter to families. That was the kind of whatever regulation at the time. You had to do a daily update to families, and when every update that you're giving is just negative, you don't have anything good to say, and you don't have any answers, but still finding a way to say that in a way that now these families and residents and staff still feel like that you've got them. Like, oh, it was wild. But we did it. And you know what? We had the most amazing team, and everybody was always there to pick up the pieces. And I always say that Evergreens Foundation just attracts the most incredible people in the world. We always have. We put an ad up for any job, and we usually have our pick of several amazing people who could come and fill it. And it's those great staff that really enabled us to be so successful. And it wasn't my communication to them, but it was even their communication back to me that allowed me to then communicate up the channels to say, this is what my staff are feeling. Do you guys know that AHS staff in the North Zone don't understand this? Or do you know how this is impacting lodges differently than long-term care? Or, all those other bits and pieces. And I was also very honored in October, actually, to receive the Queen Jubilee Platinum Medal from the Minister of Seniors and Housing, and it was for the work on they did a facility-based continuing care review, where I was invited to sit on the expert panel to review the process kind of going from home care to lodges to continuing care onward, and also the committees that I sat on within the COVID pandemic. So again, it was amazing, and I was supposed to do this speech in October, and so I would have been really all over it, but it's old news now. It's still good. And and I just think that's kind of how we kind of how we have to look at things is you've got to what can you do and where can you be and who do you need to reach out to and who do you need to communicate to get to these different places. So I think I talk so fast. We are going to do a question period though. There are some questions. So I think in general it's my life hasn't been a trajectory of I went to school for specifically this, I knew I wanted to major in this, I wanted to do whatever. I have never really known what exactly to do, but I know what I don't want to do, and I know what I don't want to be the result. And somehow you get the right people and you have the right conversations and you end up in a place where it all works out. Never underestimate the healing power of a cheeseburger. I think all you chocolate lovers have been missing out this whole time. It's a lot more expensive. And I think just don't underestimate the power of showing up and being honest. And I think that, so many times we have this, like, I'm afraid of this, or I don't want to do this, or I don't want to have that conversation. But, you can still go into a meeting, with whatever levels of executives and be honest and open. And it completely changes the dynamic in a room, and I think because everybody feels it, we all have it, but very few people have the ability to just own it, and for me that's been very successful. And I think the biggest thing for me over and over again, although it shakes me to my core many times, is you have to lean into those difficult conversations, and they suck. And there's a lot of them. And whether that's with employees or whether that's with government or that's with, whoever that is, you have to lean into them. And it's, that's how, when we're looking at we're doing a few new facilities right now. So we have an incredible project right now. It's the Victor Lake Elders Lodge up in Grand Cache. And I had to have a conversation with the provincial government to say, this is a non-status off-reserve Indigenous group. Are they Indigenous enough to receive your funding? That's not a fun conversation to have. And the reality was that at the moment the answer was no. And we had to have a really raw, honest conversation about, number one, how can I go back and say that they're not Indigenous enough to receive this funding? And number two, how can we fix it? And so we've been very fortunate through that. We were able to receive $2.5 million in grant funding for that. The project is going ahead, and now I'm fighting with the federal government because they are not Indigenous enough for the federal government. And those are difficult conversations. But you have that, and you go with the community, and we've been doing these elder engagements. So we had one up in Grand Cache, for the Victor Lake project. And then I've just had 3, we're building a 45-unit seniors lodge in Wildwood. People say, why the hell would you build in Wildwood? But if you see that map of Yellowhead County, there is actually, when we built the lodge in Hinton, there was a greater need in the east end of Yellowhead County for lodge beds than there was in Hinton. It is incredible the amount of seniors and the density of that population. And so because of the kind of that whole piece of Yellowhead County, we thought, well, we're gonna do 3 different engagements. So we did one right in Wildwood, we did one in Evansburg, and we did one in Knighton Junction. And they were all completely different. And it was fascinating. And what it's kind of really taught me is it's not Kristen going in there and saying, this is what I want to build, this is what we do, and in Hinton we have pickleball and whatever, but it's like, what do you need? And again, that difficult conversation piece. Why do you hate seniors housing? Why would you never come to a seniors lodge? how do you feel about retiring into a hotel room? You know, this is the questions I'm asking. People are like, oh, you know, how do you feel about pets? Do you like carpet? You know, do you want to collect your food like a cafeteria? But having those difficult conversations again kind of draws people up to say, yeah, you know what? I just wish that I could have a 2-bedroom suite with no kitchen. And I'm like, oh, we've always put a kitchen in the 2-bedroom suites. We've never thought of it that way. And so having those open conversations, people, they want in-floor heating. They want underground parking in Wildwood. I don't know if we can do that, but it's been part of it. But what you start doing is you start co-creating. So it's not me sitting in Hinton imagining what the Indigenous elders wanted in Victor Lake, and it's not me envisioning what they want in Wildwood, but like, how can we co-create this? I know my program, and I know I'm good at housing, so that's no problem. But what do you need me to be for you in your community? And I think that once we have that co-creating piece figured out, the hardest thing about the job, and I think most people's jobs, if it has anything to do with politics, is I have a municipally elected board. So I potentially, annually, could have 6 new bosses every year. Hasn't happened yet. But it has happened where I've had only 1 board member after an election cycle who comes back. And actually when I became CAO in May, the election was in the fall, and I had 2 of 7 board members at that time, because Grand Cache was still a town. I had 2 of 7 that came back. So I was brand new, never done this before, and I'm sitting there with 2 board members. And, but you know, it's interesting, but you know, then you've got the provincial election, which is a whole other thing. Then you have the federal, and federal, they do have a lot about housing, and they care a lot about Toronto and Vancouver. And you know, we have to do a ton of work in our rurals, especially and even provincially, to say this is what the rural communities need. And you know, enough about the big guys and enough about the density. You know, my need for 10 units or 5 units or 20 units is as much as your need for 20,000, and it has the same impact. And that, you know, again, showing up at the right tables where you can have those conversations is a huge thing. And what I'm finding in my long 16 years is the more that you really have that core community need ironed out, you're in a position where you can easily pivot. It doesn't matter who shows up in government. It doesn't matter what happens. If you know what you need, you can change your grant agreement, you can name your housing something different, you can switch a rent model, you can, you know, whatever those pieces are, you can do that so easily. And you have to have that base though. And the base isn't coming from anything political or anything corporate, it's coming from the people. And I think that's just the biggest thing, is that, you know, we can move ahead with our plans. I look at our strategic plan that the Evergreens Foundation does. You know, we've updated it several times. We just redid it, I don't know, Leo, when was that? Feels like 100 years ago. It's probably 2 months ago. Yeah, it was 2 months. And but you know, it really doesn't matter what happens, because we're ready, and we're ready to say this is what our community needs, and we can go with whatever happens. And that's probably been one of the biggest realizations for me, is, you know, you can get so tangled up in, oh, what's coming down the pipe, or who's doing this, or cut this funding, or do this, but if you know your core needs, you'll find a way to make it work no matter what happens. And yeah, none of the changes really matter, your business can continue, and I think we're a good example of that, of, you know, despite what's happened, we've moved on quite seamlessly. You know, look at the Pine Valley Lodge, you know, that was built with no provincial funding. That was fully municipally funded. We did receive a small $1.8 million grant from the federal government and a 1% interest loan for a bit of it. But the municipality said, we need this, we recognize this need, we're moving ahead with it, and it's the right choice. You know, it's a beautiful facility, it's meeting that need, it's changing. You know, we say we want our residents to live independent at whatever stage of life, and our job is to keep the residents as independent as long as possible and within our community, and that's exactly what's happening. And I think in kind of closing is that, you know, just because you're a bit of a personal mess, I could have talked about that for an hour with no problem. It doesn't mean that you can't do huge things. You know, you hear people, oh, I'm not in a good headspace, or, you know, my kids are too young, I'm a single parent, my mental health isn't good, I'm waiting for a surgery, I've got, you know, all these things that we say to tie us up, and who cares? You know, we all could sit there and say all of these things that put us in all of these positions and all the reasons why, but it's you just have to keep going, and you have to keep looking ahead and seeing what the, you know, where do you want to be and what do you want to do and why do you get up in the morning, and you know, whether it's keep swimming or, you know, being heliotropic, you know, just rotating your face towards the sun. But I would say through all of my experiences in the last while, if you keep your face to the sun, you'll be very glad that you did.